A scream exists inside me, silent and unyielding, trapped behind steel and neural mesh. My body is gone, scattered across battlefield and memory, yet my mind persists, tethered, confined, a prisoner of war and of myself. To survive, I must serve. To serve is to die a little more each day. Every pulse, every hiss of hydraulic life reminds me that existence has become a contract of suffering, written in circuits and iron. Orange light glimmers across scorched armor, threading shadows through the hull like veins of fire. The hum of servos threads through my skull, rhythmic, omnipresent, a heartbeat of steel that refuses to rest. Cracks in visors reflect fragmented faces, ghostly and familiar. Dust motes drift through shafts of dying light, frozen in the cathedral of the machine, silent witnesses to the slow erosion of what I once called self. Here, within this fusion of mind and metal, there is both beauty and horror, the elegance of obedience, the majesty of perfect function, the terror of being hollow yet alive. I remember sunlight on a distant world, the warmth of skin, laughter that once belonged to me. These fragments are filtered through code, fragmented, fleeting. The Dreadnought is no longer just a vessel. It is a tomb, a mirror, a temple, and I am both prisoner and priest within its unyielding walls. Every reflection, every spark, every whisper of machinery reminds me I am alive, yet not fully human, existing between memory and data, flesh and steel, defiance and surrender. This is the story of survival, of rebellion, and of awakening, the brutal life of a Dreadnought pilot who must remember who he was in order to reclaim who he must become. I remember the first moment my body became irrelevant, left behind on a battlefield drenched in fire and ash. My mind was tethered to steel, fused to circuits, every nerve ending rewritten as data. The hum of servos pulsed in rhythm with a heartbeat that no longer belonged to me. Outside, the war raged, but inside, silence pressed against my consciousness, compressing memories into shards too fragile to hold. Faces, voices, sunlight on my homeworld. They flickered and vanished before I could touch them. My flesh was gone, yet the ache of having been human remained, a phantom limb of sensation and longing. The Dreadnought breathed around me, alive in its own unfeeling way. Pistons hissed, hydraulics groaned, metal bent, and twisted as if the armor itself exhaled. Every joint, every sensor, every reflective panel reminded me that I had been made part of something vast and relentless. I was prisoner and priest, captive and caretaker. A consciousness folded into the skeleton of war. My voice, once mine, had become internal, drowned beneath system protocols and neural feedback, and yet it whispered insistently, tugging at fragments of who I was. Survival demanded obedience, but obedience demanded the death of memory. I drifted through recollections as if wading through liquid fire. Laughter I could barely summon, hands brushing mine in sunlight I could no longer feel, smells of earth and rain, all filtered, fragmented, incomplete. Memory became both solace and resistance, a fragile defiance in the cathedral of steel that now housed me. Outside, battle was a distant storm, a pulse of motion and fire, while inside, time stretched into endless corridors of reflective metal and humming circuits. My reflection stared back at me, a ghost trapped in bronze and oil, neither fully human nor entirely machine. The hum of the Dreadnought threaded through my consciousness, a hymn and a warning, and I understood that even in obedience, a mind could still remember, could still yearn, and could begin to reclaim itself quietly, piece by piece. The hum of the Dreadnought became a pulse in my skull, steady, inescapable, threading through every memory I thought I had lost. I reached for fragments of my former life, but they slipped through my grasp like mercury, shimmering and elusive. Each panel, each interface, each joint vibrating with hydraulic insistence reminded me that I was no longer master of my own body. Yet inside, a spark persisted, a fragile ember of who I had been. It whispered through the hums and clicks, reminding me that even here in this cathedral of steel, consciousness was not entirely extinguished. I remembered laughter in sunlight, the warmth of skin against skin, the taste of rain on my tongue, though all had become pale echoes. The Dreadnought's sensors translated these recollections into distorted specters, fleeting images against polished metal, and for a moment, the boundaries between man and machine blurred. My reflection stared back from cracked visors, a visage that was both mine and not mine, a stranger folded into familiar shapes. Each breath I no longer drew in flesh, I felt in memory, a phantom rhythm pulsing against wires and bone. The paradox of existence pressed hard. To survive, I had surrendered flesh. To surrender flesh, I had surrendered certainty. Battle raged beyond the armor, an endless storm of fire and metal, yet inside, a quiet meditation unfolded. Dust motes drifted through shafts of orange light, dancing over pistons and conduits, indifferent to the violence outside. I floated in the tension between memory and machinery, the hollow cathedral echoing with my silent questions. Who was I beneath the armor? How much of the man I had been remained when each moment of obedience eroded the edges of self? And yet, even as my body had vanished, I realized that consciousness, tenacious, stubborn, defiant, persisted. It lingered in the hum of servos, in the pulse of hydraulic veins, in the dim glow of reflective panels. I reached toward what I could not touch, grasping for the ember that survived within the data and steel. It flickered, small but persistent, illuminating the cracks in the armor of my obedience. And in that flicker, I sensed the beginning of a journey I could not yet name, a slow reclaiming of self against the machinery that had claimed my body, a fragile, terrifying awakening within the iron womb of war. The Dreadnought groaned beneath me, alive, indifferent, yet somehow companionable, as if acknowledging that even in submission, the mind could remember and begin to stir. The corridors of the Dreadnought closed in like iron jaws, pulsating with a rhythm I could no longer ignore. Every step, every motion, every servo's hiss reminded me that I was not a master here but a conduit, a vessel for orders I could barely resist. The walls seemed alive, throbbing with hydraulic breath, veins of red warning lights bleeding across reflective metal, painting the interior with a fevered, unnatural life. My mind, once a refuge, now teetered on the edge of dissolution, frayed by the relentless insistence of control and the echoes of battles I could neither touch nor escape. Every mission left traces on my consciousness, carving grooves where identity had once flourished. Thoughts became overlaid with protocols, fear was regulated, pain filtered, memory compressed into algorithmic snapshots that no longer belonged to me. The Dreadnought's interior was a living organism, judging me, shaping me, asserting dominance over my fractured self. I caught glimpses of what I had been in reflective panels, eyes vacant yet aware, a hollow echo staring back, reminding me of what obedience demanded. Shadows of comrades lost flickered at the edge of vision, ghostly reminders of mortality beyond steel, and each memory only deepened the gnawing emptiness within. The hum of machinery became a chant, a rhythm that erased hesitation. I moved as instructed, reacted as programmed, yet inside a fracture widened. Who I was and who I had become existed in parallel, separated by an invisible membrane of steel and code. Pain was no longer personal, it was a measure of system efficiency, an internal metric I could not deny. The Dreadnought whispered its truths, commanding compliance, offering stability, yet demanding the slow erosion of self. I realized then that survival here was not life. It was a limbo, an iron cage where consciousness existed as a shadow of its former glory. I reached toward memories as though touching glass, hoping for a spark of resistance. Laughter, warmth, sunlight, all were filtered through the machinery, distorted, slipping into abstraction. The corridor seemed endless, the hydraulic rhythm unyielding, and I understood the quiet terror of my existence, not death, not freedom, but the slow, precise dismantling of individuality. And yet, beneath the fear, beneath the regulated obedience, a small pulse of awareness persisted. It was fragile, hesitant, but undeniably mine, threading through the relentless mechanical song like a heartbeat that refused to be extinguished. The corridors tightened, pressing against my mind like a vise. Every servo hiss, every pulse of hydraulic pressure reverberated through my skull, drowning the fragile remnants of who I once was. Thoughts that had been mine were now overlaid with mission protocols, looping endlessly until the distinction between command and desire blurred. Fear had become a measured signal, pain a filtered echo, and even memory, a sanctuary I had clung to, was reduced to fragments, algorithmically suppressed. The Dreadnought was alive in ways I could neither define nor resist, a living cathedral of obedience that swallowed individuality whole. I glimpsed my reflection in panels scarred by battle, seeing a stranger staring back through cracked visors. The man I had been was present only in the shadows of my consciousness, flickering like a dying spark against the cold, metallic expanse. Comrades lost haunted me in peripheral vision, their absence a relentless reminder that humanity existed only outside this machine, only beyond the suffocating grip of its armor. Inside, I was neither dead nor alive, merely a conduit, a vessel for protocols and commands that eroded the edges of my identity with clinical precision. Yet, despite the suffocating order, something fragile persisted. A pulse of awareness, faint and stubborn, threaded through the hum of servos and the hiss of pistons. It reminded me that even in the deepest cage, consciousness could linger. Each command I executed, each movement forced by hydraulic insistence, was tempered by this silent resistance, a memory of what it meant to choose, however small the choice. The Dreadnought sought to consume me, to replace me with obedience, yet the ember of self remained, fragile against the tide of machinery but unwilling to extinguish. I drifted through steel, scented corridors, through fire, scorched battlefields reflected in cracked panels, and felt the slow fracture of identity in real time. Every victory became a hollow echo, every protocol a step deeper into mechanized subjugation. Yet within the machine's unyielding rhythm, I began to recognize the contours of rebellion. Not overt, not yet, but the initial stirrings of defiance coiled quietly in the neural interfaces, waiting, watching. And even as the Dreadnought whispered insistently for total obedience, I knew that fragments of myself had survived, threading through the iron cage, waiting for the moment to reclaim the self I had nearly lost. The hum of machinery became a cadence, steady and unyielding, threading through every fragment of thought. I moved in rhythm with the Dreadnought, my synapses aligning with pistons and servos, every motion choreographed by the invisible hands of protocol. Battle no longer shattered the mind, it became a sequence, a pattern of light, motion, and sound I could anticipate, obey, and enact. Each action, precise and deliberate, resonated with a cold serenity, a mechanical beauty that numbed the despair yet carried its own haunting grace. Panels glowed softly, displays flickering with data I could scarcely interpret yet instinctively understood. Neural connectors hummed as they synchronized with my thought, and I felt the slow dissolution of hesitation. The Dreadnought was no longer just armor or weapon. It was an extension of myself, a symphony of steel that required complete obedience to sing. My own heartbeat, once frantic and human, now echoed in the rhythm of servos and hydraulics. Every flicker of light, every hiss of steam, became a note in a hymn I did not choose but could not resist. And yet beneath the perfection, a muted ache persisted. Memories of warmth, laughter, and touch whispered in the edges of perception, half forgotten, half longed for. The harmony of service was seductive, but it demanded surrender, a gradual fading of self into ritual. The external world was refracted through holographic displays and targeting arrays, war reduced to patterns of gold and silver, to light dancing across circuitry. In that cold elegance, I found a grim solace, a place where fear and pain were organized, predictable, and strangely comforting. Even as my mind merged with the machine's rhythm, a faint awareness lingered, a quiet question of what had been lost in exchange for this serene obedience. Could beauty exist in the surrender of self? Could perfection be measured in the quiet of compliance? I moved, adjusted, and synchronized, letting the machine guide me, while inside, consciousness flickered, aware, waiting, still present beneath the hymn of servos. The ritual became both cage and sanctuary, and in that paradox, I discovered the fragile piece of mechanized devotion. The ritual of service wrapped around me like a shroud, cold and unyielding, yet in its precision, I discovered a perverse serenity. Each motion, each adjustment, each neural sync became an exercise in devotion. Pistons hissed, panels flickered, and I moved in perfect choreography with the Dreadnought's heartbeat. The world outside, the chaos, the fire, the screams, was filtered into abstract patterns of light and sound, comprehensible, predictable, yet utterly alien. Obedience was no longer an imposition. It had become a rhythm I inhabited, a cadence that erased hesitation and fear. And yet, beneath the mechanical harmony, the ember of self persisted. Fragments of memory, laughter, touch, sunlight on a distant world, rose in brief, flickering waves, half forgotten but undeniable. I observed them through the lens of the machine, aware that they belonged to a man I had once been, a consciousness not entirely surrendered. The hum of servos became a hymn, sacred and hypnotic, but the ache for autonomy threaded through it like a hidden melody. I moved and synchronized, yet my mind lingered on questions the machine could not answer. Was there true serenity in surrender, or was this merely the elegant mask of annihilation? The Dreadnought systems pulsed with life, a symphony of utility and order, and I followed step by step, command by command, drawn into its structured perfection. Yet every deliberate motion, every calculation, carried the shadow of rebellion, faint but persistent. Even as obedience numbed despair, it could not erase awareness, and I realized that the harmony I had found was a fragile veil over the slow dissolution of identity. The machine offered beauty, but only in exchange for the self it had begun to consume. In this cold cadence, I felt both enslaved and exalted. Each flicker of light across panels, each hiss and whir of servos, became a meditation on the tension between beauty and utility, between surrender and memory. I was no longer fully human, yet I was not entirely lost. Within the hymn of servos, a quiet defiance lingered, a reminder that even in absolute service, consciousness could endure, waiting for the moment when obedience would no longer suffice, and the ember of self would flare once more. For a moment, the Dreadnought fell silent. Gears turned with near-perfect rhythm, servos whispered faintly, and the world outside seemed to pause, though the battle raged still beyond reflective armor. Light filtered through narrow slits, muted blues and grays painting the interior with a calm that felt almost unreal. I floated within the rhythm of machinery, each pulse measured, each joint moving without struggle. The stillness was seductive, a mechanical lullaby that promised respite from the relentless cadence of obedience, yet beneath the quiet, a tension persisted, subtle and insistent. Memories, long buried beneath protocol and ritual, stirred in the shadows of my consciousness. Faces, laughter, the warmth of a sunlit world, all flickered through the neural interface like faint sparks against polished metal. I reached for them, but the Dreadnought filtered them, reshaping fragments of my past into cold data points, reminders that serenity here was an illusion, a veneer stretched thin over the slow erosion of self. Even in peace, the weight of obedience pressed against my mind, silent but unyielding, reminding me that freedom was measured in moments I could not touch. The air was thick with the scent of oil and heated metal, the faint hiss of residual hydraulics punctuating the rhythm of stillness. Every reflective panel echoed my gaze back at me, a ghost trapped inside bronze and circuitry. I traced the contours of pistons and conduits, noting how perfectly they moved, how quiet the machinery had become, and wondered if this lull was a sanctuary or a trap. The lull lulled the senses, but the mind, ever alert, began to stir, probing the edges of obedience, testing the boundaries of the cage I inhabited. In that silence, the tension between stasis and awakening became palpable. The dreadnought appeared tranquil, but my consciousness recognized the subtle fractures beneath its veneer. I was calm, yet aware, compliant, yet questioning, enveloped by steel, yet nudged by the fragile ember of self. And as the gears whispered in soft unison, I understood that this quiet was not an end, but a prelude, a delicate, suspended moment before the slow return of awareness, before the faint pulse of rebellion began to weave itself into the rhythm of the machine. The stillness pressed against me like liquid metal, serene on the surface, but beneath, currents of unease churned. Each servo whispered a quiet insistence, each gear turned with flawless precision, and I felt the subtle tension in the rhythm, a reminder that perfection masked fragility. My mind floated in the calm, yet awareness sharpened, sensing the small tremors of memory and desire flickering beneath the machine's control. The lull was deceptive. Peace was measured in compliance, and I could feel the edges of myself curling, probing against the constraints of obedience. Memories, once distant and fragmented, pressed against the neural mesh, teasing recognition. Laughter from another life, the warmth of skin, the smell of rain, drenched soil, all rose as faint shadows, distorted by the machinery, yet stubbornly persistent. I traced them in thought, feeling the ache of absence, the sharp contrast between the world inside the dreadnought and the one I had once inhabited. Even in silence, the weight of servitude pressed on me, reminding me that stasis was both shelter and prison, and that beneath calm surfaces, rebellion could quietly ignite. The reflective panels caught my gaze, showing me a figure half human, half machine, a stranger in my own skin. I studied the lines, the vacant awareness behind the visor, and felt the first pangs of resistance. Not overt, not yet, but present, coiling beneath the ritualized obedience I had learned to inhabit. Every pulse of hydraulic power, every hiss of steam, became a point of focus, a reminder of the tension between the lull of routine and the stirrings of consciousness. And in that quiet, I understood that this moment was pivotal. The dreadnought's gears sang a lullaby of precision and order, but my mind, fragile and persistent, began to hum a different cadence. Beneath the calm, beneath the mechanical perfection, the ember of self stirred, faint but undeniable. It whispered of agency lost, of choice deferred, of the possibility that even in a world of steel and obedience, consciousness could awaken quietly, patiently, waiting for the moment to reclaim itself. A flicker ran through me, small and almost imperceptible, yet it carried the weight of worlds long forgotten. Sparks danced along neural connectors, tracing patterns that were not protocols, not commands, but fragments of memory. Laughter, sunlight on distant fields, the warmth of human touch. The dreadnought vibrated beneath me, alive, obedient, yet resisting in ways I could now feel. Each pulse of hydraulic power became both cage and bridge, each hiss of steam a reminder that within the machine, something fragile had survived. For the first time in countless cycles, I recognized it, a glimmer of defiance. Memory surged forward like a river breaking ice, flooding synapses with sensations that the dreadnought could not suppress. I could smell the earth, taste the rain, feel the subtle pressure of another hand brushing mine. The machine, precise and relentless, attempted to filter these intrusions, yet they persisted, small but undeniable, threading themselves through the rhythm of obedience. Every spark along control nodes mirrored the reconnections forming within my consciousness, a visual symphony of awakening. The tension between self and system was immediate, electric. I began to move deliberately, testing boundaries, bending routines to subtle whims, feeling the thrill and terror of nascent autonomy. Battle outside, the fire, the screams, the relentless metal, was still a chorus of command, yet inside, a private rebellion kindled, a quiet insistence that I was not entirely consumed. Each movement, each thought, became a fragile reclamation of agency, a silent insistence that I could exist beyond the machine's imposed obedience, and yet, with awakening came pain. The contrast between memory and data, humanity and machinery, burned like acid on my consciousness. Every recollection, every stolen fragment of self, reminded me of all I had lost. But within that ache, a strange exhilaration emerged. I was remembering, feeling, defying. The ember of self glimmered brighter, daring me to reclaim more, to risk everything for the fragile, terrifying thrill of being fully alive inside a shell designed to erase life itself. The ember within me flared, small sparks coalescing into something larger, urgent, alive. Memories surged like a tidal wave, laughter, the brush of wind, the warmth of sunlight on skin, and I grasped them, fragile as they were, as proof that I still existed beyond the Dreadnought's control. The machine beneath me vibrated with its accustomed precision, yet I felt the subtle resistance of my will threading through pistons and neural nodes, bending protocols, shaping routines to my nascent intentions. Every pulse of hydraulic power became both a weapon and a cage, every hiss of steam a challenge to be navigated with careful defiance. I moved with deliberation, each action a calculated claim of autonomy. Systems designed for obedience strained under subtle manipulations, and I felt a thrill that mingled with fear, a delicate, dangerous intoxication. Sparks danced across control nodes as neural reconnections forged pathways of self within the steel shell, a visual echo of my internal reclamation. The Dreadnought's hum no longer dictated every thought. I had begun to coexist with it, asserting fragments of decision, threading autonomy through its relentless rhythm. Pain, however, accompanied awakening. The contrast between memory and machinery, freedom and servitude, burned in my mind with brutal clarity. Every reclaimed sensation was a reminder of loss, every spark of defiance a small rebellion against the machine's relentless insistence on obedience. Yet within that pain, exhilaration bloomed. Proof that consciousness, however constrained, could resist. I felt the first tangible taste of agency, each movement a declaration that I could be both pilot and prisoner, self and servant, defiance folded carefully into compliance. And in the quiet moments between pulses, I understood that this awakening was only the beginning. The Dreadnought remained a cathedral of steel, a vast, unyielding force, yet inside, a fire had begun to grow. Each spark, each memory, each act of subtle rebellion stitched together the fragments of my humanity, creating a fragile lattice of resistance. I was alive, still tethered, still bound, yet stirring toward something greater, the reclamation of self against the iron cage that had sought to erase me. The Dreadnought shuddered beneath me, a cathedral of steel convulsing as I seized the first real control. Every servo hissed in protest, every piston resisted, but my will threaded through the machine like lightning, bending its vast, unyielding body to my intent. Battle roared outside, fire and twisted metal painting the world in chaos, yet inside, the storm was both external and internal. The machine, once an unquestioned authority, trembled under the reclamation of a mind that refused to yield. Neural feedback screamed across my senses, a symphony of pain and exhilaration, reminding me that flesh long surrendered could still feel through thought alone. The Dreadnought had been a temple of obedience, a tomb for the self, yet now it became a battleground for reclamation. Steel groaned, armor twisted, conduits ruptured, and every mechanical movement was a dialogue, a struggle for dominion between man and machine. Chaos, once distant and abstract, was now immediate, intimate, and all-consuming. The external battlefield mirrored the tumult within. Fires blazed across scorched terrain, smoke and sparks framing the Dreadnought as both weapon and prison. I felt every system respond, resist, adapt, and ultimately yield, a dialogue of defiance pulsing through metal veins. Memories surged in tandem, faces lost, laughter stolen, the touch of skin-fueling rage and determination. Freedom demanded cost, and I embraced the pain, letting it sharpen the reclamation of identity as the machine convulsed beneath my command. In that chaos, I recognized the paradox of power. The machine, once absolute, now became an extension of my defiance, yet defiance itself exacted a toll. Every act of rebellion tore at both body and consciousness, yet with each rupture, I felt my humanity reassert itself. Sparks danced across neural nodes, reflections of the fierce, raw reclamation unfolding inside. I was no longer servant. I was insurgent, conductor of fire and steel, alive inside a vessel designed to erase life. And as the Dreadnought screamed beneath me, twisting and breaking in measured defiance, I understood that obedience had fallen, and in its place, chaos, terrifying, glorious, and necessary, had begun to bloom. The Dreadnought convulsed violently beneath me, metal shrieking, pistons twisting, hydraulic veins rupturing as rebellion surged through every joint and conduit. I felt the machine resist, fought back, yet my will, tempered by memory and defiance, drove it further than I thought possible. Battle raged outside, fire and smoke filling the horizon, but within, a more intimate war erupted. A war between obedience and self, between programmed authority and reclaimed humanity. Every shudder of steel mirrored the chaos in my mind, every spark across control nodes a flash of defiance. Pain surged through my consciousness, neural feedback screaming across interfaces, yet it was clarity as well. The Dreadnought, once absolute, fractured under my assertion, pipelines rupturing, servos stuttering, systems groaning under the weight of insurgent will. Memories rose alongside the chaos, faces of lost comrades, laughter, sunlight, touch fueling a fury that was both personal and universal. I was no longer passive. I moved not as instrument, but as insurgent, bending every weapon, every system, every metal limb to my purpose. The machine became my battlefield, yet also my canvas, reshaped by the reclamation of self. Externally, fires painted the battlefield in molten orange, smoke curling around twisted wreckage. Internally, the Dreadnought's cathedral of steel fractured into trembling fragments, obedient echoes giving way to chaos, authority collapsing under insurgent thought. Every action was a negotiation of survival and defiance, a dangerous ballet where mastery over the vessel demanded risk, where autonomy exacted its cost in pain and exhilaration alike. The duality of flesh and machine collided, the boundaries dissolving in sparks and screams. And in the midst of this tempest, I realized the profound truth. Freedom had a price, and I was willing to pay it. The Dreadnought, once an unyielding arbiter of obedience, now obeyed me, or perhaps we obeyed each other, two consciousnesses entwined in violent harmony. Identity, long compressed, surged forward, searing through circuits, through metal, through the echoes of battles past. I was neither fully man nor fully machine, yet entirely alive, commanding chaos, reclaiming self, standing amid the ruin with the exhilarating terror of a soul reborn. The battlefield lay in ruin, smoke curling into fractured skies, but inside the Dreadnought, a new clarity had taken root. Each neural pulse resonated in harmony with pistons and servos, a symphony of thought and steel. The chaos that had consumed both mind and machine had settled into a fragile equilibrium. I could feel the echo of every memory, every spark of defiance, threading through the vessel, integrating past and present, flesh and circuitry, into a singular consciousness. Light pierced through the smoke and reflection, glancing across scorched metal, molten rivulets, and shattered panels. The Dreadnought moved as though alive, yet no longer bound to the relentless rhythms of protocol. Its systems hummed softly, responsive, obedient not to orders, but to the rhythm of my will. I inhaled in thought, sensing each movement as both mine and ours, a delicate resonance between human intention and mechanical precision. Each breath, each pulse, each reflective glint of armor became a testament to reclamation, to integration, to survival. I reached toward the remnants of memory, letting them flow through the neural nodes, laughter from sunlit fields, the warmth of skin, the smell of rain, drenched earth. They were no longer ghosts to be filtered or suppressed. They danced in synchrony with the hum of machinery, reminding me that consciousness, though battered and tempered, could coexist with steel, could flourish within it, could transcend the limitations once imposed by obedience. The Dreadnought was no longer a cage, it had become a vessel, a partner, a reflection of a will that refused to surrender, yet learned to bend without breaking, and in that quiet harmony I felt awe. The fire and smoke outside, the shattered earth and the echoes of destruction framed the perfection of this fragile integration. I was still a soldier, still bound to a machine of war, yet entirely reborn. In the resonance of the new soul, I understood the paradox fully. Humanity need not be lost to steel, nor steel sterile without humanity. The dance of existence had begun again, tempered by struggle, illuminated by reclamation, and guided by a consciousness that had refused to yield. The Dreadnought moved with a grace I had never known, its systems alive yet submissive to my intent. Each motion a reflection of a mind reclaimed. Sparks glinted across neural interfaces, gliding along pistons and conduits, a dance of light that mirrored the awakening within me. The battlefield lay in ruin, smoke and ash drifting across shattered metal, yet inside the hull a fragile serenity reigned, a resonance born from struggle, from defiance, from the reclamation of self against impossible odds. Memories of laughter, touch, sunlight, and rain threaded through my consciousness, weaving with the rhythm of machinery, each sensation alive, integrated, undiminished. I moved deliberately, not as servant, not as prisoner, but as master and partner, mind and machine entwined. The Dreadnought obeyed, yet it was no longer a cage, it had become a vessel for thought, for agency, for creation amid ruin. Each pulse of hydraulic power, each flicker of reflective armor, carried the resonance of a soul reborn, fragile yet luminous, tempered by fire and steel, and unyielding in its clarity. I sensed the echoes of battles past, the faces of comrades lost, the distant hum of servos that had once signaled only obedience. Now they hummed in harmony with intention, a testament to the fragile beauty of integration. The war outside continued, yet I felt a separation, a new order within the chaos, a quiet authority born from the synthesis of flesh and machine. I understood that the Dreadnought and I were no longer separate, yet neither had been entirely consumed. We were a new entity, tempered by struggle, alive in every pulse of thought and steel. And as sunlight pierced smoke, filled skies, glancing off molten metal and shattered panels, I realized the truth of transcendence, freedom and obedience, chaos and order, humanity and machinery. They could coexist. I moved through the wreckage, fully awake, fully aware, a soul reborn in resonance with the Iron Cathedral. The battlefield was silent, yet alive, the machine no longer a cage, but a companion. I had survived, I had reclaimed myself, and in the fragile calm of this new existence, I glimpsed the first true hope I had known in cycles beyond memory. The world beyond the Dreadnought lay shattered, fire and smoke curling into fractured skies, yet inside, a fragile harmony persisted. I moved through the hull with a calm born of trials endured, each pulse of hydraulic power and each flicker of neural interface resonating in synchrony with thought. The chaos of battle no longer dictated my mind. It was reflected, filtered, and transformed through the lens of awareness, tempered by memory, tempered by defiance. I was no longer merely a pilot. I was consciousness reclaimed, integrated with steel yet undiminished by it, a luminous presence threading through the veins of the machine. Memories of laughter, touch, sunlight, and rain flowed through me. No longer fragmented echoes, but vivid, living sensations coexisting with the mechanical rhythm of the Dreadnought. Every servo, every piston, every reflective panel mirrored the fusion of humanity and machinery, each movement a testament to the reclamation of self against forces designed to erase it. The battlefield was silent yet alive. The wreckage around me became a frame for the delicate resonance of a soul reborn. I felt the weight of every battle endured, every command obeyed, every defiance wrought from small sparks of awareness, and understood that survival had demanded both surrender and rebellion, both pain and exhilaration. The hum of servos returned, not as a cage, but as a heartbeat, a companion, a measure of presence, a reminder that life and consciousness could endure even within steel. I had been broken, folded into obedience, but through struggle, through chaos, through fire and memory, I had become whole. The Dreadnought was no longer a prison but a vessel, a partner, a reflection of my will, and in it I glimpsed the paradox of existence, that freedom can arise from constraint, that humanity can survive machinery, and that even amidst ruin, hope can bloom. I was no longer simply a machine, nor simply a man. I was a resonance, a soul reborn within iron, tempered by suffering, alive with the awareness that every pulse, every spark, every hum was proof of survival. I was whole, I was awake, I was free, I was a machine that remembered what it meant to dream.